Alright, in this video we're going to take a look at multiplying and dividing radical expressions, and for these ones it might be helpful to convert them to rational exponent form first, so power over root, and then use the law of exponents. So if you're multiplying like bases, add the exponents. If you're dividing like bases, subtract the exponents. And if you're raising an exponential expression to a power, multiply your exponents. So example 5, simplify each of the following. Leave no radical expressions in a denominator. That's also known as rationalizing the denominator. So we have part A, the square root of x to the fifth times the square root of x squared. So writing those in exponential form, we have x to the 5 halves power times x to the 2 halves power. And when we add 5 halves and 2 halves, we get 7 halves, which in radical form is the square root of x to the 7th. Now, we are taking an even root, and 7 divided by 2 is 3, and then the remainder is 1. So that third power of x, that 7 divided by 2 is 3, x cubed is in absolute value bars because this is an even root. The remainder is the power of x that remains inside the radical. So we have the absolute value of x cubed times the square root of x. Part B, we have the square root of a cubed times the cube root of a squared. That's kind of weird. It's a to the 3 halves power times a to the 2/3 power, and we add 3 halves and 2/3, we get 13/6. So a to the 13/6 power. That's the sixth root of a to the 13th power, which 13 divided by 6 is 2, and then the remainder is 1. So the remainder stays inside the radical. In this case, it's the sixth root of a, or the sixth root of a to the first. And because it is a squared, you could use absolute value bars around it, but it's not necessary for this particular instance. So our final answer is a squared times the sixth root of a. Part C, we have the cube root of y to the 6 times the square root of y cubed, which cube root of y to the 6 is y to the 6/3 power, times the square root of y cubed is y to the 3 halves power. So adding our exponents, 6/3 plus 3 halves gives us 7 halves. So it's the square root of y to the 7th. Now 7 divided by 2 is 3, and because it's an even root, we have to put that y to the 3rd power inside absolute value bars. The remainder, when we divide 7 by 2, is 1. That remains inside this radical, this square root. So our final answer is the absolute value of y cubed times the square root of y. Part D, we have the square root of x to the 5th over the square root of x. So square root of x to the 5th is x to the 5 halves over square root of x is x to the 1 half. This time we're going to subtract our exponents. So 5 halves minus 1 half is 4 halves. So x to the 4 halves power simplifies as x squared. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Part E, we have 7 over the square root of 2. So we'll see quite a few rationalizing denominators in our future. So here's our first instance where we can't leave a square root in the denominator, but we can rewrite it as 2 to the 1/2 power. And what we need is no more power, no more fraction powers. So if we multiply the denominator by 2 to the 1/2 power again, 2 to the 1/2 times 2 to the 1/2 is 2 to the 1st power. If we multiply the denominator by 2 to the 1/2 power, we must also multiply the numerator by 2 to the 1/2 power. So our goal is, when we write the denominator with rational exponents, is to multiply it by something so that your exponents add up to 1. And whatever you multiply the denominator by, you also have to multiply the numerator by. So this will give us 7 times 2 to the 1/2 power, and then we have 2 to the 1/2 times 2 to the 1/2 is 2 to the 1st, or just 2. And 2 to the 1/2 power is the square root of 2. So we have 7 times the square root of 2 all over 2. As an alternative, we could just multiply the numerator and denominator by the square root of 2, and we'll get 7 times the square root of 2 is 7 times the square root of 2, and then the square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is just 2. It's the square root of 4, which gives us 2. But if you have different roots and such in the denominator, you might want to take this approach. Part F, the cube root of y to the 6 divided by the square root of y cubed. Cube root of y to the 6 is y to the 6/3 power. The square root of y cubed is y to the 3 halves power. And then 6/3 minus 3 halves is 1/2. So y to the 1/2 power, which is just the square root of y. All right, that about does it for this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.